thanks to the whole team at Ethics and Tech for the invitation to join you tonight. And thanks to all of you for letting me into your homes this evening. I'm really pleased to be speaking to you from Vancouver Island, Canada, on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen people. As you heard, I'm the program manager at Mines Action Canada, and we're Canada's Humanitarian Disarmament campaign. So humanitarian disarmament essentially puts the focus on the human impact of weapons. So people are at the center of what we do. And as you've heard from other speakers, nuclear weapons take an unimaginable toll on people. For some context, that horrible explosion in Beirut this week was just a tiny fraction of the damage a nuclear weapon would cause. Today, the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, is an excellent time to reflect on the actions people have taken to promote nuclear disarmament and efforts that are currently being made to prevent future indiscriminate and inhumane weapons. Now, I have to admit, I was a little wary of combining a commemoration of Hiroshima with comedy, but I thought about all my interactions with survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and beyond the pain of their stories, what really has stood out to me is the laughter. Whether we were joking about who had the best negotiation snacks, conspiring to make Canadian politicians really uncomfortable about their lack of action on the issue, or having a few pints on Peace Boat when the translators wandered off. There's always been a lot of laughter. 75 years ago, Hiroshima was full of people with the same range of emotions that we have. And we cannot forget that the world was robbed of so much laughter, joy, and light when that bomb killed thousands of people in the blink of an eye. But we also can't ignore the laughter, joy, and light that fuels activism. So as Reverend Blake said, today is the chance to lament and to mourn those we're lost, but it's also an opportunity to embrace action fueled by laughter, compassion, and camaraderie. And taking action is exactly what we need to do. People around the world have been speaking out about nuclear weapons, as you've heard, for 75 years. But the past 7 years has seen a dramatic shift in the diplomatic level on nuclear disarmament. And a lot of that has been due to action from regular people like you and I. Between March 2013 and December 2014, over 100 states, along with international organizations and civil society, led by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, met 3 times to discuss the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons through a diplomatic process known as the Humanitarian Initiative. Shockingly, those meetings were actually the first time the international community had ever got together to talk about the humanitarian harm caused by nuclear weapons and our collective capacity to respond should a nuclear weapon be detonated again. Those meetings led to 2016's UN resolution to start negotiations on a treaty banning nuclear weapons, and it was passed by the UN General Assembly by a wide margin. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, usually referred to as by the acronym TPNW, was adopted in July 2017 and opened for signature in September of that year. It currently has 84 signatories, and as of today, 43 ratifications of the 50 states parties it needs for entry into force to make it international law. For our efforts to highlight the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons and our role in the negotiation of the TPNW, ICAN was awarded the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. Now, it hasn't been easy. Of course, there's been opposition. We know that some nuclear armed states, in particular the US and the UK, have been pressuring their allies, including Canada, to not attend negotiations, and regardless of their decades-old obligation under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, where they had to disarm. Canada was actually invited to join an American-led press conference to express their objections to holding these negotiations, but Canada did not go. Side note, if you object to negotiations, holding a press conference in the UN and just outside the room the negotiations are being held in, it's a surefire way to ensure that these negotiations you wish weren't happening are front page news. So I really do need to get around to sending a thank you card to Ambassador Haley. Now, critics have said that the TPNW threatens global security and it won't eliminate any nuclear weapons. So let's look at those. First, There's no evidence that nuclear weapons actually keep us safe. For some reason, when we talk about nuclear weapons, the whole concept that correlation doesn't result in causation goes right out the door. But what we do know, as Brett alluded to, is that there's been dozens of near misses, including a flock of geese being mistaken for incoming missiles, bombs literally falling off planes, computer glitches, and a wrench being dropped in a missile silo, which resulted in the missile exploding. But luckily for everyone who lived in Arkansas in 1980, the warhead didn't explode. Now, for the assertion that the treaty will not eliminate any nuclear weapons, there's a pretty easy response. Well, of course not. Treaties aren't magic. We know that getting a treaty and even winning the Nobel Peace Prize is actually the easy part. The real work comes when you have to turn words into reality and strengthen the norm so that the idea of having or using nuclear weapons becomes unthinkable. We're doing the real work now, and in a few minutes, I'm going to share some ways that you can help. But first, I've also been asked to talk about killer robots. Now, these future weapons go by a bunch of names: fully autonomous weapons weapon systems, lethal autonomous weapon systems, but they all mean the same thing. Weapon systems that would be capable of selecting targets and using force, lethal or otherwise, without any human input or interaction. In 2013, Mines Action Canada and a number of other organizations founded the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots because we had a variety of legal, technical, security, moral, and ethical concerns about the possibility of these weapons. We're really pleased to have ethics and tech among our partners in this campaign. And one thing that makes this campaign really unique among humanitarian disarmament campaigns is the high number of roboticists, AI experts, engineers, computer scientists, and other academics taking part in the campaign. Within a year of launching the campaign, a UN disarmament treaty body called the Convention on Conventional Weapons, a prime example of why you don't let lawyers name things, took up the issue and has since been discussing lethal autonomous weapon systems. So I totally get that UN talks about killer robots sounds a little surreal. So let's talk a little bit about the issue before getting into the much promised what you can do. So autonomous weapons are problematic because there's no certainty they'd be able to follow existing international humanitarian law. So that's the laws of war. And the big thing there is you need to be able to distinguish between combatants who may be targeted and civilians who may not be. A robot couldn't be programmed to deal with every situation it might encounter on the battlefield. So if a robot unlawfully killed a civilian instead of a soldier, who would be responsible? According to Human Rights Watch, the programmers, manufacturers, and military commanders would all likely escape liability. Under criminal law, if a military commander used an autonomous weapon to intentionally kill civilians, they would be held accountable. But it would be unfair and legally impossible to hold commanders accountable for situations in which the robot acted in an unpredictable way they couldn't foresee. It might be impossible to know why an autonomous weapon killed a civilian. It could have been spoofed, hacked, or damaged, or maybe it just simply implements its programming in an unexpected or weird way. Beyond the battlefield, autonomous weapons threaten rights and principles under other international law, fundamental as the right to life, the right to a remedy, and the principle of dignity. Under human rights law, which applies during peacetime as well as war, these weapons could be prone to killing people unlawfully because the weapons cannot be programmed to handle every situation, or they could be operating through biased tech. Autonomous weapons would also undermine human dignity because as inanimate machines, they couldn't understand or respect the value of life, yet they'd have the power to determine who lives and who dies. There's a lot of other moral and ethical concerns about autonomous weapons, which I'll leave for another event with ethics and tech. But all these moral and ethical concerns, they're often being voiced by scientists and engineers. And they really remind me of the Russell-Einstein Manifesto from 1955, which spoke of the dangers of nuclear weapons. The 11 signatories, which included 10 Nobel laureates, asked world leaders to remember your humanity and forget the rest. These words apply now more than ever as technology is advancing in new and concerning ways while we're seeing increased tension around the world. But even as the COVID-19 pandemic forces diplomacy online and provides ample distraction from these issues, Ordinary citizens are proving that our organizational motto of ordinary people, extraordinary impact is very true. Ordinary people making the impossible possible is common in disarmament, and there's a pretty simple formula for how you can do it too. Okay, I've adapted this from my colleague Ray at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, who talks about how discontent, courage, and action resulted in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I love Ray, but I disagree with her slightly in that I believe it's conviction, courage, and to keep the alliteration, collective action. Discontent needs a conviction that a better world is possible to allow people to move forward and not be paralyzed by the enormity of a problem. So in each of these campaigns, we started out with some pretty simple convictions. Nuclear weapons threaten all of us, so they should be prohibited and eliminated. There should always be meaningful human control over the use of force. So autonomous weapons should be prohibited before they are ever developed or used. The campaigns developed these convictions through research, including hearing from survivors, listening to scientists, and including experts from affected communities. We use that information and a basic belief in human rights and the limits of war to build the convictions. Of course, having conviction means little unless you have the courage to stand up for it. And having strong convictions really does help you give the courage you need to challenge the status quo. We had to speak up against global superpowers who want to keep their weapons. We get told we're crazy, we'll never succeed, or worse. The states that want to keep their nuclear weapons are angry. States that want to build autonomous weapons are indignant. Diplomats supporting action on these issues are confronted and pressured not to make change, not to sign treaties, not to attend negotiations, or really do anything. When it comes to the nuclear ban treaty, proponents were told we were unrealistic, overly emotional, love that one, naive, while also being accused of undermining the NPT and dividing the international community. Now, that's of course despite the fact that calling for a ban treaty is essentially implementing a key article of the NPT, Article 6, and that every meeting of the Humanitarian Initiative and the negotiations were open to all states. On autonomous weapons, we're being told we're just Luddites, forgetting all of the AI experts and computer scientists and tech workers that support the campaign. We're also told that we can't stop progress, it's premature to ban autonomous weapons, and that we need to be more realistic. Through all that, campaigners in some states had the courage to say, no, these weapons are unacceptable. The survivors of nuclear weapons use and testing have demonstrated an astounding amount of additional courage, sharing their painful stories of loss and trauma again and again. But when you have courage and conviction, it's easy to take action. And one of the main focuses of our action has really been change the conversation. For too many decades, the global conversation about weapons was something for experts. And most of those time, the experts were men with security or military backgrounds. The rest of us and our opinions were something to be humored, maybe. But weapons were serious work for serious people and couldn't be tainted with humanity and emotion. Actually discussing what weapons do to people was considered a weakness. But talking about what weapons do to people is exactly how disarmament campaigns and the international community can break through diplomatic deadlock. More importantly, talking about the humanitarian impact of these abhorrent weapons allow us all to have a say. You don't need to understand nuclear fusion to realize that weapons that destroy cities and irradiate people and the environment are illegitimate. And you don't need a degree in computer science to find the idea of a machine choosing who lives or who dies on the battlefield or at the border abhorrent. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. This formula of courage, conviction, and collective action has been successful in other disarmament treaties before the TPNW, like the Ottawa Treaty banning landmines and the Convention on Cluster Munitions, both of which Mines Action Canada is very involved with. And we know it will help us prevent autonomous weapons from ever being used. But everyone does have a role to play in these efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons and ban killer robots. On nuclear weapons, ICANN has a city appeal where you can get your city to pledge to support the treaty, even if your national government won't. And if you check out don'tbankonthebomb.com, you can find out if your bank is investing money, your money, in nuclear weapons producers. You can speak out. Faith leaders have been crucially important for both campaigns, as have military veterans, and then on killer robots, tech workers speaking out both their companies and at the political and policy level have made real change because they don't have rose-colored glasses about what the tech can do. Even just helping ethics and tech get the word out in your own community would be a huge help. Plus, I'm guessing most of this audience is American, and you have an election year this year. So that means you're probably going to be hearing from a lot of campaigns that want your vote. When they call, tell them you want to see nuclear disarmament and you want a ban on killer robots. Ordinary people speaking up can have an extraordinary impact. Now, you've heard from Janet some words from my fellow campaigner, Setsuko Thurlow, who 75 years ago was a 13-year-old trying to free herself from the burning wreckage of a building in Hiroshima. As Janet had on her slide, she shares her story of how a man touched her shoulder and told her, "Don't give up, keep pushing. I'm trying to free you, see the light coming through that opening, crawl to it as quickly as you can." She made it to the light that day in 1945, and since then it's been speaking out for nuclear disarmament in memory of her classmates and family members who did not. As you heard, in December 2017, she delivered half of the Nobel Peace Prize lecture on behalf of ICANN. She called the TPNW a new light to guide us all and implore us to follow each other out of the dark night of nuclear terror. No matter what obstacles we face, we will keep moving and keep pushing and keep sharing this light with others. So I do know that things are very dark right now, but I hope that you'll take Setsuko's words to heart and be inspired to find a way to be a light on these issues. It is possible to build a world without nuclear weapons and to prevent autonomous weapons from ever being used. We just need you to remember your humanity and speak up.